Hey guys, welcome to a beautiful Saturday from Hill Country. Today we're going to be looking at the top 20 high yield ETFs of the week. Now this is the top 20 based on a metric that I've developed to help me and the people in my Discord trade these high yield ETFs. Now the metric is based on yield, of course. It's also based on momentum. It's also based on total return, and it also considers volatility or safety. All right, guys, let's get in the middle of it. Coming in at number 20 on the list is SDTY. Now, SDTY is from our friends over at YieldMax. They sell synthetic covered calls daily on the S&P 500. Great job. This is the first time they've been on the list. Let's look at number 19. Number 19 is DISO. This is also from YieldMax. They sell synthetic covered calls on Disney. Coming in at number 18 is IWMW from BlackRock, Old Wall Street, getting into the game here with the covered call funds. These guys sell actual covered calls on the IWM, which is otherwise known as an ETF that trades the Russell, that mimics the Russell 2000. Let's look at number 17. Number 17 is a stock called DIVO from our friends over at Amplify. Great job, DIVO. Coming at number 16 on the list is FEPI. Now, FEPI's a fund that I've been covering for a long time. It's been around ever since I've had this channel. FEPI has a basket of 15 to 20 tech stocks. It's based on an index called the Selective. Selective is the name of the company, and they're a German company. They're out of Germany. In any event, the index is made up of American companies primarily. Anymore, they're multinational companies. But they're big tech companies. They do a great job. They sell covered calls in the monthly time frame, and they actually own the stock. Now, owning the stock itself doesn't give you more upside. A lot of people think it does, so that's not true. But selling calls in the monthly time frame instead of the weekly time frame does give you more upside. And so they own stock and sell calls in the monthly time frame. Looking at number 15, we have QYLD. Now, QYLD is from Global X. QYLD has been around for a long time. QYLD is one of the oldest ones of this, probably the oldest fund on the list. It's been around since 2013 and does a nice job. QYLD pays 1% a month, and they're very consistent about it. We're going to compare QYLD to the Qs since inception. The Qs do better, and that we would expect that because QYLD is selling covered calls. What the covered calls do, they cap your upside. But nevertheless, the Qs don't pay you 1% a month, and QYLD does. So coming in next on the list is QDTE from our friends over at Roundhill. Great job, QDTE. Now, QDTE is somewhat similar to SDTY from Tidal. They both sell options in the daily time frame synthetically. Great job. Let's just compare QDTE to SDTY. Now, the QDT is based on the Qs, SDTY is based on the S&P, but we're still gonna, they do the similar strategy, so we're still gonna take a look at them, and let's just look at for this quarter. Why don't we just go back to April 1st, May, June, and July. Well, July's not over yet, but anyway, we'll go from April 1st. Well, there we have it. QDT has done a little bit better lately, but if you look in the pullback, it looks like they were both protected capital to about the same degree. They both appeared to be down about 12% into the April pullback. So I would call that in line with the market. If you look over here at the NAV, SDTY's NAV started at 45 and it's still at 45. QDTE's NAV started at 35 and it's still at 35. Great job, guys. Let's see who's next. XYLG from Global X. That's nice. Now, I was talking about QDT, or I'm sorry, I was talking about QYLD from Global X, and they do a good job of paying you 1% a month. Well, XYLG does a good job of paying you 0.5% a month, or about 6% a year. The difference between the two is XYLG has a strategy where they only write options on half of the portfolio. And the portfolio in this case is the SPX. So they write it on half of the portfolio, but that leaves them owning half of the SPX, unencumbered by options, free to appreciate as much as you want. So XYLG compared to QYLD generally should get a little bit more upside. Coming in at number 12 on the list is CVNY from YieldMax. Great job, CVNY. This does synthetic covered calls on the stock Carvana. Let's look and see who's next. AMZP from Curve. Great job. Now, AMZP from Curve, they're going to do synthetic covered calls on Amazon. The difference between a Curve product and a YieldMax product is the Curve product does the synthetic covered calls. They execute their strategy in the monthly time frame, whereas a YieldMax equivalent would do the weekly time frame. So let's look at that really quick. Let's compare AMZP, which is the Curve product, to AMZY over the last couple of months. Now, I can tell you right now, AMZP uses monthly options, so AMZP's NAV will perform better. However, AMZY does weekly options, so AMZY's yield will perform better. Let's see if I was right. Well, they're both really close, but let's look at AMZP's NAV. Started at 26.70 and it ended at 29.36, so it's up a couple of bucks. That's great. AMZY's NAV is hanging in there, started at 16, ended at 16. So you can see AMZP's NAV did a little bit better. Now, but if we want to look at here at the dividends collected, AMZY made $2.50 in just a quarter of a year. So you extrapolate that out to a year, it's about $10 on a $16 investment. That's pretty dang good. That's pretty dang good. Now, AMZP does a great job. Also, they paid $2 about over a quarter of a year. So we'll make that $8. They're returning about $8 on something that initially cost you 26. So that's about 25%. They're both doing a great job. It depends if you prioritize NAV or if you prioritize yield. Coming in next on the list is FIVE from YieldMax. Now, FIVE is kind of a unique fund. Now, what makes FIVE unique is they switch in and out of their stocks. They don't have a static portfolio. They use the 5 hottest stocks according to a metric by a company called Dorsey Wright. That's why this is called the YieldMax Dorsey Wright Hybrid 5 Income. They choose the top 5 Dorsey Wright funds. Well, that's wonderful, and we can look who they are. The top 5 Dorsey Wrights are HUI, YBIT, YBIT, JPMO, Facebook, FIBI, which is based on Meta, and then they have some in-fly. The Dorsey Wright metric is similar to the MaxFactor. In fact, the MaxFactor was kind of inspired by the Dorsey Wright. Let's see who's next on the list. Next on the list is OARK from our friends over at YieldMax. These guys do synthetic covered calls on the Cathie Wood ETF ARK. Nice job. Coming into number 8 is CONY. CONY does synthetic covered calls on Coinbase. Now you look here, CONY's 3.3 days above average. That's what the MaxFactor is. A one MaxFactor unit is a day above average compared to the rest of the stocks in the MaxFactor universe. Right now, there's about 100 stocks in the MaxFactor universe, and the ETF to be in the MaxFactor universe has to be considered high yield, has to pay a 50% premium over the 10-year. Right now, the 10-year is at 4.25, so you have to pay more than 6%. You also have had to have been around for more than a quarter to be on the list. If there's somebody that's not on the list that you know of that needs to be on the list, put it in the comments, and I'll darn sure put it on the list if they meet those qualifications. Nice job, CONY. Now, coming number 7, we have GPTY at 3.5 days above average. That's wonderful, GPTY. Now, GPTY, I would compare somewhat to FEPI. It is also based on about 15 to 20 tech stocks, but at the same time, they're selling options on them. So while we're talking about that, let's just compare old GPTY to FEPI over this quarter or the past couple of months. Okay, now you can see here that GPTY is spanking FEPI, but you can also see that in the pullback, they both protected capital right about that. They look like they're equal, pretty much equal in safety, at least in this last pullback. They have some stocks in common, but you can also see here recently GPTY is just pulling away from FEPI. So let's look at protecting capital. GPTY started at $40 and is at 46, just over a quarter of a year. FEPI started at 41 and is at 46. So that they're both really good. Now GPTY had about twice the dividend. You can see it there, paid 4 instead of 2. 428 instead of 271. So not quite the dividend, but they did pay a premium on the dividend. All right, so let's see what's next. YBTC from Roundhill. Nice job, YBTC. Now, YBTC, we were talking about YBIT earlier whenever we looked at the stocks that were in 5E. YBIT is one of the stocks that's in 5E. YBTC is Roundhill's version that does basically the same thing. So let's take a look at YBTC from Roundhill. And YBIT from YieldMax. This is over the last quarter. So here we have it. You can see here YBTC is ahead by just a little bit. What I like about this, though, you can see both of these ETFs were down less than 10% in the April pullback, or from April 1st. So that's a little bit less than the market. So these ETFs both protected your principal a little bit better than the SPY. That's great to see, but YBTC has pulled ahead lately. Coming in next on the list is NVDW from Roundhill. Great job, NVDW. They sell synthetic covered calls on NVIDIA. That's been a good business to be in lately because NVIDIA is something else, right? Let's see who's number 4. Number 4 is KQQQ from our friends over at Curve. Now, we premiered, I think this ETF was actually announced on my channel. I've always liked this ETF. It's a fund of funds. Let's look at a little KQQQ here. Let's compare KQQQ to the Qs and see how they're doing. This is just over a quarter, and I would expect the Qs to have done better. But no, I was wrong. KQQQ over this time frame is outperforming the Qs. And the other thing is KQQQ pays a way bigger dividend, about 20 times bigger. Just eyeballing it real quick. That's something else. It's paid 70 cents over a quarter. So that would be $2.80 over the course of a year. Now, and the Qs basically pay a very tiny dividend, but you don't own the Qs for the dividend. You own them for the total return, but KQQQ is beating right now the Qs, albeit by a little bit. Great job, Curve. You guys do a good job. Now, Curve sells options in the monthly time frame, which generally means you get more upside, whereas YieldMax sells options in the weekly time frame, which generally means you might sacrifice a little upside return, but you get more yield. It depends on how you want your money back. It's your money. You worked hard to earn it. They'll give it back to you any way you want. You can, depending on which one of these you buy. All right, let's see who's next. Will is next. Wow, look at this thing now. Will is 8.9 days above average, where KQQQ is just 5 days above average. That is very impressive. There's quite a difference there. Let's just look at Will. Now, Will uses an option strategy called the Will. Go figure, right? Let's compare Let's compare WYL to SPY. Okay, the SPY's beating WYL, but the WYL still looks pretty good. WYL still looks pretty good, and it pays a lot bigger dividend than the SPY. Let's kind of look at the WYL's dividend here. So it's 60 cents over a quarter of a year. So we make that $2.40 for a year, and it cost $18 initially. So that's 15% or so. That's not bad. Not bad at all. You look at this, the WYL pays 15%, and its total return for the quarter is 9%. That's really good. If you want to break it down further, if the WYL pays 15% for a year, that comes out to 3.5% for the quarter. So 3.5% of the return came from yield, but they had a 9.29% total return. So what does that mean? That means the other 6% came from NAV growth. And you can see that. It started in 1856 and went to 1968. That equals about 6%. It has to. That's all you have in a return. You have the yield and you have the NAV return. Total return equals the yield plus the NAV return. All right, who do you guys think is next on the list? Number 2 is SPUT from Innovator. Now, SPUT is something else. It's a good stock. It's a good ETF. Now, these guys do a covered put, or not a covered put. These guys sell puts. Selling a put is synthetically equivalent to doing covered calls. So these guys do puts on the S&P, and they also, I think, just do puts on half the S&P. So they have half of the S&P unencumbered to grow as high as it wants to. And this is an interesting fund. I have a friend in this fund, so that's great. I'm always pulling for this fund. Let's compare SPUT to WYL. Let's see how these look. All right, well, WYL is a little bit ahead of SPUT, but you can definitely see that SPUT, if you look over at the left part of the chart, protected capital better. It was down less than 10% in the April pullback, where WYL was down about 15%. Or I'm sorry, 12.5%, which is WYL was in line with the market, but SPUT did a little bit better than WYL. Now, WYL's done better on the upside, but they're both doing pretty well. Let's look at SPUT's dividend. It's only 45 cents, so that would be $1.80, but that comes out to about 6 or 8%. So, that's not bad. So just look at this quarter. They have a total return of 5.8, right? But they're paying a 6% dividend, so that's 1.5% for the quarter. If you subtract 1.5 from 5.86, you get 4.25 or 4.36. So that, they've got 4% of the return from NAV upside, and they've got the rest from catching that yield. Great job, guys. Let's look and see who is next. Or who's number 1. Number 1 on the list is MSFY. Great job. Now, they do synthetic covered calls on Microsoft, and they're 10 days above average. That's really good. That is really, really good. So let's look. Now, MSFY from Curve. So we've talked about Curve a little bit, but let's look at this one more time. Let's look at MSFY from Curve, and let's look at MSFT. I'm not MSFT. Let's look at MSFO, which is from YieldMax. Now, before I even click on it, so what we know about Curve is they sell options in the monthly time frame. YieldMax sells options in the weekly time frame. So we know what happens. Once you understand how these work, you can anticipate the way you're going to get paid back. Selling options in the monthly time frame is better for catching NAV upside, but is worse at catching yield. So I would expect MSFY, which uses the monthly time frame, to be probably ahead on total return, but definitely ahead on NAV return. But MSFO is going to have a higher yield. So let's see if that was right. All right, so MSFY, look at this one. MSFO actually beat MSFY. That's something else. That is really something else. Well, anyway, the moral of this story is they're both good stocks. MSFY had paid a $1 dividend a quarter of a year. So that'd be a $4 dividend for a year. It costs $22. Oh, was that 25, 30%, something like that, 30%. All right. Well, no, it's not 30%. It's like 15% or something. Now, MSFO, they sell options more frequently. They probably pay about 30%. Let's see, they paid $2 for a quarter of a year. So that'd be $8 for a year on something that costs 16. Yes. MSFO pays about a 50% yield. MSFY paid a 15 to 20% yield. So both good stocks. Depends on how you want your money back. As far as NAV return goes, MSFY did have better NAV return, just as I predicted, because they sell options in the monthly time frame. So that does not impede the NAV growth as much. Sure enough, their NAV grew from 22 to 26. So that's, you know, that's good. That's plenty of upside. Whereas MSFO's NAV went from 16 to 18. That's not bad either, but I would rather have 22 to 26. That right there is why MSFY is number one and MSFO isn't. I'm also considering safety and a balanced set of factors. So MSFY, according to my metric, is number one this week. Congratulations, guys. MSFO, as you can see, still makes a mighty good investment. All right. Or it's at least over this past quarter it does. Now, that doesn't mean it'll make a mighty good one in the next quarter. That's one of the problems with looking at statistical analysis is statistics and this kind of stuff, especially where I'm measuring momentum. It's measuring what happened in the past. It's not going to tell you what happened in the future. However, to the extent that trends exist in the market, in other words, if this trend that the market's having exists another quarter or two, I would expect similar stocks. I mean, I would expect these stocks to keep doing well. All right, guys. Well, I appreciate y'all for being here on this beautiful Saturday morning. I'm going to go mow the neighbor's yard and go take Jackson for a WALK. I don't want him to hear me and get too excited. I don't think he can spell, though. Guys, you have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later.